think, what I believe will be a very fruitful discussion. Again, my name is Demetrius Carolina. I'm the Executive Director at the Central Family Life Center. And thank you all again for being participants in this really meaningful dialogue. So without any further ado, Kelly, if you could make the introductions, and then we can give way to both of these phenomenal leaders to talk with us and to open up the doors for a conversation. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Doc, for the introduction. So my name is Kelly Ortega. I'm the administrative assistant here at the Central Family Life Center. And I want to introduce Dr. Robert Bollinger from the John Hopkins Medicine team, and also Dr. Theodore Strange from Staten Island University Hospital. And I want to ask if we could please have Dr. Bollinger speak more on today's topic, which is COVID-19, the variants, the different variants that are out right now. And then we will have Dr. Strange talk more about, is the vaccine effective on these variants? And then we can open up the floor for some questions.
Well, thanks, Kelly, and thanks as well, Dr. Carolina. It's nice to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. I wanted to first perhaps ask the group how much people understand about why this virus has variants. I mean, do we understand why we're seeing these variants? Is that something that people are interested in a better understanding about?
I think that would be a lovely start.
Well, so, I mean, I apologize if I'm telling you things you already know, but, all viruses, when they make copies of themselves inside of our bodies, when they replicate themselves, almost all viruses, particularly this group of viruses called RNA viruses, which is where this coronavirus sits, they're sloppy. They make mistakes when they make copies of themselves. And when they make mistakes, we call those a mutation. We call those mistakes when they copy themselves a mutation. And that happens randomly. It happens all the time. Whenever these viruses infect a new person and begin to replicate, these mutations happen. And these RNA viruses, like coronaviruses, they do this a lot. Usually, because they're random mutations, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. But sometimes the virus, for lack of a better term, gets lucky. And it makes a mutation that allows that virus to change something about its function, about its behavior. And in this case, this coronavirus has, you probably heard about this thing called the spike protein, which is on the outside of the virus. And that's what the virus uses to stick onto our cells in our respiratory tract. And so when the virus makes mistakes and makes mutations to that spike protein, some of those mutations cause the virus to fall off, but others cause the virus to stick more tightly. And unfortunately, over time, when we've had millions and millions of people getting infected, some of these mutations have happened that allow this virus spike to get stickier. In particular, the most common mutation or variant we're seeing now in the United States is this one you've probably heard about. It's got all kinds of names. We use scientific names to usually give it a number that helps scientists understand where the mutation is. This is called B117. The British variant is the other way people refer to this. So this variant was first described in Britain and is now 60% of all the virus transmissions in the United States right now are from this new variant. And that probably 2 or 3 months ago, it was less than 10%. Now it's 60%. And the reason is because this variant is stickier. And so it's easier to transmit. And we also think that when it does infect people, because it's stickier and it can replicate more efficiently, it looks like it might actually make people sicker as well. So it's transmitted more efficiently, and it may be making more people sick than the other variants. Now, I'm sure Dr. Strange will talk about what I think is good news about the vaccines against this particular variant and some of the others. But there are lots of variants circulating around the world, not just this one, but the most common one is this British B117 variant here in the United States. Does that help, Kelly?
Yes, doctor, thank you so much for that.
Do you have any questions about, does anybody have any questions about that so far? I'm sure we'll get into some Q&A in a moment. Anything unclear about what I said so far?
I think you made it very clear. And I'm sure as we go on with the presentation, there will be new questions that will arise, and hopefully we'll take a few minutes to answer those questions.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Strange, you have the floor.
Sure, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Bollinger, for that explanation for everybody out there. I just hope everybody takes the vaccine, because that's really the saving grace to all of this. So the vaccines are out there right now. There are 4 current vaccines that have been approved, 3 of which are used in the United States, 1 in Europe and around the world. The common ones we're using here are the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. Those are the mRNA vaccines. Those are very different technology and platforms in terms of how they work. And people were concerned about the quickness to market, so to speak, of these vaccines. However, the technology and the science of these vaccines have been tested for many, many years. And in fact, the original studies of this type of technology came out early on with SARS and Ebola, when the Ebola crisis was a potential issue back in the early 2000s. And it may be the technology backing other therapies. It does not change. It does not interfere with one's own DNA. The DNA is our, and that seems to be the big hot topic all over the internet that people talk about, that somehow it's going to change the color of your hair. And I'm being a little facetious for a second. For my political friends who are Republican, I tell them it's going to change to Democrats, and the Democrats are going to change to Republicans. It doesn't do any of that. This vaccine, these 2 vaccines, do get into the cell. They get into what is called the liquid of the cell, the cytoplasm, and then it's taken up into a very special organ there where the RNA is transformed into something that looks like that spike protein that Dr. Bollinger was just speaking about. And then the cell actually spits that spike protein out, for lack of a better term, where it sits on the surface, and the body's able to produce its fighting cells. We call those antibodies. And those antibodies are the soldiers that in any vaccination that we give, whether it was measles, mumps, rubella when we were young, or polio, you name the vaccine, flu vaccines every year, it's those antibodies, those neutralizing antibodies that are coming on board to fight the infection if it were to get back into your body again. And that's the premise of all vaccinations. So the 2, Pfizer and Moderna, as was just explained, even with the British variant and with the South African variant, which are the 2 that were in the New York area, and probably we estimate probably 60% or 70% of the cases now may be those 2 viruses. The good news is that these 2 vaccines for sure are effective against these variants. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a typical old type technology. It's a viral, we call it in medicine, a viral vector vaccine. It utilizes a virus. This particular one utilizes something called adenovirus, which is another cold virus that's out there. And it takes the corona protein into that virus. It gets into the body. And again, it releases it so that the body then produces those fighting cells called antibodies. And the good news about the Johnson & Johnson one, up until a couple of weeks ago, was that it was only a one-time shot, where the other 2 were dual shots. The Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca, which you may have heard about, which has been given out in Europe, were one-time shots. And yes, there were some side effects, but there are side effects to everything we do. The good news is that we were so sophisticated and science was so monitoring this that we were able to pick this up in such a small way. It was a unique side effect, no question, in women of 18 to 45 years of age. Somewhere between 10 and 15 women got this in the 6.5 million shots given. You're likely to get hit by a bolt of lightning sooner than get one of those effects. But that being said, I wouldn't want to be any one of those people. And more importantly, it was just re-released again last week because we know how to treat that side effect now if that were to occur, because it really was very different from just a blood clot that you would get in your leg or some in your lung. It had to do again with an immune response that caused this particular type of entity. So it's back being introduced back into the American population and around the world, as is the AstraZeneca. And there will be a fifth vaccine that comes out, we think, sometime in May, called Norax. And that will also be a dual shot vaccine. There may be a little less, quote, allergic response because of how they prepare the vaccine, but it too seems to have good activity against these viruses. Now, the one important thing, the way variants cannot penetrate into this community would be if that you got immunized and you didn't get the virus. So the importance of early immunization is not so much worrying about the variant. It's worrying about, which is already out there, but it's worrying about just stopping this virus cold. If you don't get the infection, you can't get the mutation. So everybody, there is not one contraindication to these vaccines. There is not one contraindication to these vaccines. The vaccines that were given in the 1940s, when we gave live viruses, Dr. Bollinger and neither one of us are that old to remember, but I'm sure we studied a lot about them, where they lined people up in New York City. They lined them up in stadiums and actually gave them live polio virus. When smallpox was given, it was live virus under your skin given. In fact, it caused a reaction on your skin that caused a pox mark. Much more dangerous, much more immunogenicity in terms of the side effects than any of these 4 or 5 vaccines out there. And those that are saying, well, I don't know what it's going to do in 5 and 10 and 20 years, answer that other than to say that the science and the technology appears from every bit of evidence we have out there right now, based on previous vaccinations that we've given out for now over 100 years, close to 100 years. The side effects are minimal. The issues of combining this with other inactive reagents that may or may not have caused some issues in the past, debatable. These are safe, effective, clean vaccines. So again, to answer the first question, they are effective, they're safe, they're effective against at least the 2 variants that are in the New York City and the United States area right now, probably a few more also. And more importantly, if you get vaccinated, you don't have to worry about the variant. Just don't get the virus. And that's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both Dr. Bollinger and Dr. Strange for that lovely presentation. I think we all are now more aware of the different variants that are out there. And I just want to open the floor to any questions that anyone may have. You can either unmute yourself or write them in the chat. One of the questions that someone wrote is, how might mutations affect the vaccine? I think Dr. Strange touched a little bit upon that. Is there anything else maybe that can be added to it?
Well, let me see if Dr. Bollinger, with his expertise, wants to add to anything I said.
I would just say exactly what Dr. Strange said. The vaccines work against these variants. The best way to prevent the variants is get vaccinated. No question about it. And in fact, one of the risks is that more variants could develop later on that could actually escape the vaccine. We don't want that. So we really have to get everybody vaccinated now to stop that from happening.
Wonderful. It's great news for people that are trying to get vaccinated. Another question that there is does the vaccine protect against the new variants? Oh, I'm sorry, that was a follow-up from someone else that asked. So yes, the good news is that it does work. And Dr. Bollinger, would you happen to know or want to say anything about the other variants? I think there's been some mention of the South African variant as well. And is that any other, like, more contagious than the British variant?
Well, as I think Dr. Strange said, we are really fortunate and happy that the vaccines work against that South African variant as well. which is also stickier, transmits a little bit faster, might make people sicker. It's not as common certainly in the United States as it is in other parts of the world. As I said, the British variant's by far the most common in the United States right now. But the good news, as Dr. Strange said, is that current vaccines work against that one as well.
Dr. Bollinger, I want to ask you something, another question that I personally have. Is there any research or data that shows that maybe some variants are maybe a little more, they don't get transmitted as fast to people that have already had COVID?
We suspect that's true. We don't have as much data on that as we do on the vaccines, right? And the immune response. It turns out that people in general who get vaccinated actually have a much stronger immune response against infection than people who've had prior COVID. So certainly having COVID might provide you some protection, but it's not impossible to get reinfected. And if you really want a strong immune response, get vaccinated, don't get COVID, for all sorts of reasons.
Yes.
Great, great. I want to read another question that someone wrote in the chat. I know some people who have tested positive after dose 1 of the vaccine. How are healthcare professionals messaging to continue to use caution between doses, and how much less severe is the illness for a person who is half vaccinated?
So the issue about vaccination, since we're still in the middle of a pandemic, is that there's a likelihood of some people coming in for vaccinations who may have been exposed in the last few days and have been asymptomatic carriers or just have not come down with disease. And we've clearly seen that. We know this virus sometimes, and the effects of the virus can take about 3 to 5 days before you may see some clinical pictures of this. So if you take the vaccine in that period of a non-activity, the asymptomatic period, and then take the vaccine, it probably were exposed to the virus. The effectiveness of the vaccine probably takes about 2 weeks from everything that we can that has been tested so far in terms of the immune response. And the first dose of the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine probably give you somewhere in the vicinity of 70, 75. Some people have even said 80%. There's some data protection with just 1 dose. With 2 doses after the 3rd or 4th week, depending on which vaccine you take, that goes up to 94 to 95%, which is pretty equivalent for both Pfizer and Moderna. The Johnson & Johnson was a little less effective in terms of it being at about 80%, maybe 78, 80%. However, those that unfortunately may have been infected and got disease after Johnson & Johnson clearly had much less symptoms and were, in fact, I think the data still is that the mortality was really, minusculely low if you even got Johnson & Johnson vaccinations, which was a little less effective. But you were needle phobic and you only could take 1, or you didn't have the opportunity to take 2 for whatever the reasons that you had to take Johnson & Johnson. And there's a lot of reasons why Johnson & Johnson is important to have in our community. So again, I think we need to be careful. We're still in a pandemic. There's still a incidence or a positivity rate going on in our communities, although thankfully it's markedly coming down. So you may still be in that phase where you're vaccinated as you were exposed. And there's nothing 100%, unfortunately. We're still 80, 90, 95% effectiveness with these vaccines. I personally have seen 2 or 3 people come back into the hospital I had one, unfortunately, a physician who made it out. He did, but he was a nursing home doctor, and he had his first shot last shot mid-January, and he came in early February with severe disease. So, I'm not going to say I haven't seen it, but it is rare. It is rare. Get vaccinated. That's the answer to this whole thing. If we're going to talk about herd immunity, if anybody believes that, and I'm not sure that, where we are in that whole concept, but the herd immunity would be either everybody got the disease or everybody got vaccinated. That's herd immunity. So I don't think everybody wants the disease because there's too many people dying with the disease. Look what's going on in India right now, right? Get vaccinated. That's how we eliminate this disease.
Thank you so much, Dr. Strange, for that answer. There's two more questions I see in the chat. One of them is the antibodies from having had COVID last as long as the antibodies from the vaccine, or is that the antibodies from the vaccine are more effective?
I think it's the data we have right now suggests it's both things. When you get the vaccine, we know that the antibodies are pretty robust for at least 6 months. Of course, we haven't followed people much longer than that. But in people that have gotten the infection, we've certainly seen data where the antibody levels start declining after 2 or 3 months pretty quickly. And so the vaccine gives you a stronger and higher level of antibody, and it seems to last longer than just getting the infection. Another reason, I mean, you don't need another reason to get vaccinated because you don't want to get COVID as a way to get antibodies. You want to get the vaccine.
Of course, thank you
And you
so
don't,
much.
and you twice. Might as well just take the you don't want to get that disease twice. If you had it once, too bad. If you get it twice, that's not good.
Of course. And maybe a follow-up question would be, how long does the vaccine last? Will many of us who have been vaccinated need an additional booster in the fall or coming winter? What number and/or percentage of the population need to be vaccinated to herd the immunity?
So we're living that experiment, unfortunately, right now. As Dr. Bollinger just said, this disease is now 15 months old in the United States, approximately. So we only have data for 15 months. We only have data on vaccines. I think Moderna first started using it last June in its first trial. So the real answer to this is nobody has an answer. And anybody that thinks they're going to give you an answer yet, they don't know. If I just put my scientific hat on, I'm sure Dr. Bollinger has an opinion about this. Because of the way
Dr. Strange, you're coming in and
the
out.
likelihood is that
Dr. Strange,
the
you're coming
likelihood is,
in and out.
I'm sorry, I'm in the same place. I haven't moved. I apologize. The likelihood is that there will be a booster vaccine needed. That's my opinion. Whether it's in 6 months to a year, I just don't know the answer to that yet. I think we'll know that answer come the fall. I think that's what we're going to see. Dr. Bollinger may want to comment also.
No, I agree. I'm pretty, I'm pretty confident seeing the data so far that it's going to last at least 6 months, could even last longer. But I'm also confident, and look, we can give boosters, for goodness sake. The biggest issue is not getting the boosters, is getting the initial people vaccinated.
Yes.
So if we got to do that, and we can handle the boosters, what we really want to do is get that herd immunity you talked about to stop this virus from spreading and mutating. Every time it spreads, it mutates. We want to stop it from making people sick. And we want to stop it from mutating. And we need we need the current vaccines for that. We can get the boosters. That's not a big, we do boosters every year for influenza.
Correct.
Your kids get boosted with vaccines all the time. Boosters are not a big deal.
Right. Thank you. I have another question. Is it correct to say that the variants, which are mutations of the COVID-19 virus, are dangerous because they spread faster, not because they're necessarily deadly to people? Or does that go hand in hand?
Well, I'll just add, I think I mentioned that a little bit in the beginning. So when the virus mutates to a point where it's stickier, it sticks more tightly to our cells, that means it can spread more quickly, but it also might mean that in those cases, it can replicate in our own bodies more efficiently. So you can actually have more virus. Once you get infected, more virus will grow inside your body, and that could make you sicker. And it looks to be both of those situations for some of these variants, not for all of them.
Sure, definitely. Thank you. I have another question that came in the chat. Someone said, so after everyone is vaccinated this year, we will have achieved herd immunity and won't need to be vaccinated again next year? I think perhaps you both touched upon that, but
Dr. Strange and I both agree that, we might need a booster. We'll know in another 6 to 12 months. We're tracking this, believe me. This situation happened, the last time we had a situation like this was 102 years ago. This is not normal. So we're tracking the heck out of this virus right now. We're monitoring the antibodies and everybody that's vaccinated and all this. We're going to figure out pretty quickly, because of all the monitoring, whether or not we need a booster, when we need it, who needs it, and we'll get it done. The biggest challenge is getting people to stop this transmission right now. Get vaccinated, and while you're waiting to get a vaccine, for goodness sake, wear a mask and keep your distancing until you're fully immune. And certainly when you're around other people that are non-immune and not vaccinated.
So I just want to ask, does anyone that's currently on this virtual meeting have any questions you want to ask yourself? You can unmute yourself and do so.
Yes, doctors, great informative Zoom. I do want to ask one thing. Is 2022 the year we go back to some kind of normal?
I think that's what we're hoping for. I mean, I can say I think we're all hoping for that. I think the key here is what Dr. Bollinger just said. We need to get 300 million people in this country vaccinated. Now, less kids. I don't know where the kids sit right now. That'll be determined in the next couple of months. But as importantly as the United States gets vaccinated, if you see what's going on in India right now, if you see what's going on in European countries right now, the world is a small place with air travel and other things. We need to get the world vaccinated. That's 3 billion people that we need to get vaccinated. So this virus can not only stop on our borders, because our borders are wide open and they should remain open. So we need to understand, yes, we need to take care first here, but we also need to take care of the world. And hopefully we're going to start to see, I mean, what's going on in India right now is just so sad, so sad. And it's a system, an Indian healthcare system that just is going to crumble to its. But this is happening in countries in Europe. I mean, this is not happening just in third world countries, and India is not totally a third world country. I've been there. There's some beautiful places there. This is still happening in Italy. I have family in Italy. They were in lockdown 2 weeks ago. This is happening in Greece. This is happening in Great Britain and up in Ireland. So we need to get everybody immunized here. And I think Dr. Bollinger also said something very key. I talk about it when I'm on some of the shows, the talk shows, 3 W's. Wear your mask, watch your distance, and wash your hands. And yes, we can relax the mask wearing and relax the distancing a little bit if we know that we're in a group vaccinated and we're probably outside, and that's what the CDC said yesterday. But if we're in a tight group still, or you're inside, or if you're with vulnerable people, or you're just not sure, wear your mask. The one thing that we saw this year, just on another note, we saw zero flu activity in the United States this year. Why do you think that was? It wasn't that the coronavirus ate up the flu virus, because we also saw no other viruses out there, like rhinovirus and all these other viruses. The pediatricians were out of business almost because of that. It was because we wore masks. It's because we were socially distant. Our Asian friends for years, from Japan and Korea, have been wearing masks, and sometimes we've laughed at them. Sometimes I think they may have been onto something. They know that the viral particles that shed out of people's mouths spread virus. We learned a lot in infection control in the hospitals these days from what we've now done. And, we're washing our hands better. I mean, just simple things. So the answer to the question is, I don't know. I'm hopeful as you are hopeful, but the only way we're going to know and be hopeful is get vaccinated.
Yeah, I would just agree 100% with Dr. Strange. I think, I've been very fortunate in my life. I've had a chance to work in India for 40 years, and I've worked in Africa for more than 20 years. So I have projects and colleagues and friends in all over the world. And, we may be in a different place in the United States in 6 months because of our vaccination strategies. I hope we are. But we're not going to be able to go back to, quote, normal until the rest of the world is protected, as Dr. Strange said. This is a global world. The virus is spread so quickly. And so we already know this, right? I mean, this happened with COVID. It's happened with lots of other viruses. So we have to, I think the new normal is going to be, perhaps for a while, as Dr. Strange said, we're still going to be, well, hopefully the new normal is we're washing our hands more. Hopefully the new normal is that we're not exposing other people to coughs and stuff when we come to work. We're not coming to work sick as often as we used to. Hopefully that's the new normal. I think, I was thinking the analogy also, this has been a trauma, right? In so many ways, how many of us are still taking our shoes off at the TSA in the airport? When we had a shoe bombing, which was more than 20 years ago, we're still 20 years later traumatized by that. I mean, and behaviors change. So, there are, I think we have to expect that it's not going to be back to completely normal. And some of that, frankly, as Dr. Strange says, might be a good thing. But on the other hand, we've got to get businesses open, got to get the kids back in school. We've got to be able to see our kids and grandkids and neighbors and socialize. We've got to do all that. But I think we're still, until we've controlled things in the US, we're going to have some issues we'll have to deal with restrictions until that happens. And then after that, we've got to get the rest of the world help, because otherwise we're just going to be cycling in the United States. We can't prevent these viruses from spreading around the world. So we're going to have to help. It's, part of this in my, one of my biggest frustrations for the last year, and somebody's asked me frequently, what am I surprised? I'm an infectious disease guy. I've been thinking about epidemics and pandemics my whole career. We've been worried, I've worked in the HIV epidemic. I've worked with lots of other infections over the years. And we all were worried that there's going to be, for decades, we've been talking about a pandemic. And so I guess having a pandemic flu or a pandemic coronavirus in some ways is not a big surprise. What's really surprised me, particularly in the United States, is how we have stopped caring enough about each other that we're not willing to wear a mask. We're not willing to keep our distance. We're ridiculing people that do wear masks. We're not willing to get vaccinated, not just to protect ourselves, but to protect our families and our neighbors and coworkers and school mates. So that's been a surprise to me. Such a high percentage of people have just refused to do things that not only protect themselves, but protect others. And so that makes me perhaps a little bit less optimistic about the future, how quickly we can get back to normal. I'm not sure if I'd love to see us get back to more normal concern for each other. So we'll do the kinds of things necessary to let go of the masks and get vaccinated. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but.
Definitely. Thank you so much to both of you for your answers on that. And I have two more questions in the chat that have come through. One of them is, do they know for sure whether or not vaccinated people can still be carriers and transmit the virus to unvaccinated people?
I'll let Dr. Bollinger take that one.
Oh, yeah. No, the answer is yes, but it's rare, very, very rare. So we know that the good news is that there's a high level of protection from infection. And we also know that if you do get infected and you're vaccinated, you're less infectious to others. But as Dr. Strange said, there's no 100% guarantee in this world. But I think we got to put this in perspective a bit. 570,000 plus Americans have died from COVID. Every one of them was unvaccinated. Every one of them so far is unvaccinated. Vaccination will reduce your risk of most of the 99.99% of all the transmissions that occur are in unvaccinated people. There's always going to be a few that break through, and that happens with any virus or any vaccine. But it's such a minuscule contribution to the problem that I think we don't want to overblow these what we call breakthrough infections. The cases I've seen are situations we just described earlier. Somebody who, got vaccinated their first shot a week or so ago, and now comes in with a mild symptom of flu, and turns out to have it. Now, did they have it when they were vaccinated, or right around the same time, or they get it recently? We don't know. But the good news is they tend to be mild, and yes, during that time they could be infectious to others. That's why we want people to wear the masks all the way through until they're fully vaccinated. And if you do get vaccinated and you have a flu-like symptom, then you should put a mask back on, right? and you're gonna. It could be that you just got regular flu, or you got some other virus. But for either reason, don't expose other people to that. Stay home if you have to go. Don't go to school. Don't go to work if you got a flu-like symptom. You'll stop spreading flu as well as stop spreading coronavirus when you're vaccinated. But I would not be concerned because about the contribution of vaccinated people to transmission. Vaccinated people are the solution to the problem, not the problem. I hope
You
that
brought up
answers-
something very important. You know, there's been about 150 million cases of coronavirus in the world. There's been about 3 million deaths so far in the world. You just spoke about the 500,000 in the United States. There's been about 150 million shots now given out, I think, Dr. Bollinger, of vaccine. And we're talking about literally a handful of side effects, literally a handful. And there should be none. We don't want to see one death from a vaccine. We don't want to see one side effect, but just think of that statistic. 3 million deaths in the world, 150 million people affected, 150 million shots, and we're going to be safe with all. That's an experiment in and of itself beyond any experiment that Dr. Bollinger or I could have ever participated in terms of sheer numbers. So you want to talk about safety and efficacy? There's the number, there's the data. Nobody should be scared of these vaccines. Nobody.
There's one other thing we haven't talked about, which I'll throw in to add to Dr. Strange's point, and that is, look, it's not just the people that have died from this infection. That's enough reason. But we're hearing about all of the long COVID symptoms, right? You're hearing about people who got infected, maybe even having a mild case and are suffering, months later. Our hope is if you don't get infected by this virus, if you get vaccinated, you're protected from that side effect as well as the risk of death. So don't get the vaccine so that you don't get infected, either because it'll put you in the hospital or, God forbid, you get one of these long COVID syndromes. So there's lots of reasons to get vaccinated, not just to avoid the hospital.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I want to follow up with perhaps one of the other questions that are here in the chat. What can we say to some of our friends who may not be convinced of the effectiveness of mask wearing or hand washing?
Just
Dr. Strange, you want to take that one?
No, I mean, you're going to speak about from an infectious disease doctor. I'm just going to say common sense. I mean, clearly we know this. Transmission of diseases, forget about COVID, is clear. We see this all the time. We know that this is something that's happened over years, where if you don't wash your hands properly, things spread. Your mother told you to wash your hands all the time. Picking in the park, this is common sense. This doesn't need to be science. So now let Dr. Bollinger, who's our infectious disease doctor, tell you about the science of this, because it's not political.
I'm going back to the common sense. I mean, come on. This virus is spread through the air when we cough and breathe on each other. So why are people surprised that a mask? We know the masks work. And we know that masking and distancing works for any respiratory virus, including this one. Have you ever put your face in front of a mirror in the morning? You notice that fog that comes up on the mirror if you get too close to a mirror? That's water vapor that comes in and out of your nose and your mouth every time you breathe. Guess where the virus lives? That virus floats on that water vapor. So why are people surprised that a mask works? It traps the water vapor and the virus in the mask. So of course you're not going to be spreading it as easy. Now, I don't know what to tell people who refuse to wear a mask just because they don't want to. I mean, if people don't want to wear a mask because they don't believe it works or they don't understand it, I'm happy to talk to them about it. I have a harder time talking to people who refuse to wear a mask because they just don't want to and they don't care about other people. That's a little harder conversation. I don't have a scientific answer for that one either, Dr. Strange.
I don't think either one of us does, right?
Thank you so much, of course. I just want to ask if anyone has any last questions, any last remarks. If not, I will lend the floor to Dr. Carolina. And I just want to say
I have a
thank
question.
you. Oh, yeah, sure.
Hello, my name is Israel. I just want to know what vaccines did you guys take, doctors?
I took Pfizer. I took my first one on January 6th, and I took my second one 3 weeks later. I had local reaction on my arm where I felt bruised, like somebody hit me for a day. I have to tell you, the second one, I purposely got up that morning and I went out for a 4-mile jog, and I jogged as quick as I have jogged any other day. And I've had no problem. I've had my wife, my 4 kids. My kids range in age from 24 to 36. My in-laws, every one of my nieces, nephews, my daughter-in-law, who just delivered my first grandchild last year. The baby was 1 yesterday, just got her first vaccine yesterday. So I am a big advocate of everybody taking it. And by the way, the American College of Gynecology and Obstetrics and Gynecology has absolutely spoken about the safety of these vaccines in pregnant women and women who are nursing, and in fact may protect the infant and the neonate because of the way the science of immunology in terms of these of protecting children and protecting young newborns. So it is safe. So I took Pfizer.
Okay.
So there's my card, Pfizer. I have 5 brothers and sisters, 3 children, and about 25 nieces and nephews, and a lot of in-laws. And every one of them is now vaccinated because I pestered the heck out of them. We've had, I got the Pfizer, my wife got the Johnson & Johnson, 2 of my kids got the Pfizer, 1 got Moderna. My brothers and sisters got all the different vaccines. I said, when somebody asked me, what vaccine should I get? I said, get the first one you can. And that's exactly what they did. So Israel, does that answer your question? You have any questions?
Yeah, I was just asking because I still haven't gotten vaccinated, but seeing like when I see like a lot of like vaccines and like in my face, I'm just like, oh, like which one should I take? Like sometimes, and I feel more comfortable when a doctor actually like, tells me like, oh yeah, I got this one, and I feel more comfortable, So
Good.
thank you. Well, that's definitely the one I'm gonna get.
I mean, I got family members that got all 3 of them. So they all did fine. They had, most of them had a little sore arm, no big deal. I had a little sore arm and I had a little bit of fever after the second shot. I couldn't wait to get myself and my family vaccinated because I've seen, and I know Dr. Strange knows this, when you have to walk through a COVID unit, particularly in ICU, when I saw my first 22-year-old patient die of COVID, my first 28-year-old patient die of COVID, my 37-year-old patients dying of COVID, when I had to talk to their families, I mean, I'm giving you some examples of why it's personal for me. I mean, these statistics of 570,000, for those of us that seen it, you don't want to wish this on anyone. And if I could convince everybody to get vaccinated so that we don't have to see you in the intensive care unit or any of your relatives or families, please do. And talk to your doctor, talk to your family, make sure that you have all your questions answered. We don't want people to be confused or scared. But I would say, get whatever vaccine that's available to you, Israel, and have all your friends do the same.
I agree. If we've convinced one person tonight, Dr. Bollinger and I had a huge success, and I hope a lot of people tonight. Dr. Bollinger and I practice medicine, and every time we do something, we take a risk analysis of what we do. When Dr. Bollinger gives the most dangerous antibiotic, he's giving it because he knows the benefit clearly outweighs the risk. When you get behind the wheel of a car, God forbid, you're taking a risk, even though the benefit of getting behind that wheel of the car is to go wherever you have to go. We do that when we get in an airplane. Well, that's the vaccine here too. But again, the data is clear. It is so safe. And I agree with Dr. Bollinger. Take the first one you can get. They are all safe. They're all effective. And I too have had 24-year-olds die in my arms. I had a priest friend of mine who I was on the phone with the week before. Brother died the same, died in my arms. 1,000 people literally personally. So if I ran a hospital and we had 1,000 deaths here on Staten Island over the course. And one day I remember going 4 different rapid responses at the same time, and you didn't know whose room you were running into. And one of them was the 22-year-old. Another one was somebody's grandma. What did you do? I don't want to see that ever again in my life, ever again in my life. And the only way we're not going to see that is to stamp this out. And the way we're going to stamp this out, please go get vaccinated. And whatever one.
Thank you so much. And perhaps our last question for today. Someone asked, did you choose the vaccine you wanted?
I didn't. The hospital, that's the one the hospital had, but I would have taken whatever was given to me. At the time, it was either Pfizer, the hospital we were at Pfizer, and I was one of the first. In fact, I was chosen. They were chose by who was in the most dangerous places first. Our hospital gave it out, and I was in the first wave. And that's just that vaccine we got. And right now, we're giving Johnson & Johnson in our hospital just because it's an easy. I have colleagues that have taken Johnson & Johnson and have had no issues.
Yeah, I was in the first wave too, because I was taking care of patients early on. And so we got whatever was available. The first one we had available was Pfizer. Moderna came in late. I would have taken anyone that we got. This was, back a year ago. And it was Dr. Strange, I could tell you, this is a very stressful time for healthcare workers. And we couldn't wait to get the vaccine, not only for ourselves, but for our colleagues, the hospital workers that had to go in and out of the rooms with us every day. We would have taken whatever we could have gotten. And so the first one available was the Pfizer, but it wouldn't have mattered to me. My wife, as I said, she got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because that was the easiest. I mean, she could have had any one of them, but she just went because that was the quickest one to get.
Dr. Bollinger, Dr. Strange, thank you so much. Very, very meaningful information, comments. Thank you all for those questions, because we know that in terms of vaccine hesitancy, there's still quite a few questions out there, but I am appreciative of meaningful answers and clear answers that make sense, answers that, any layman can understand and relate to. Thank you. Kelly, thank you. And Travis for organizing, and the T2 team for having these informational sessions, which are really meaningful to all of our communities on Staten Island and beyond, because we have people sharing in these wonderful presentations from all over. And, and one suggestion is maybe we can, talk about long-term effects of COVID at another point, because now we're dealing with family members and loved ones who in fact survive, but there are in many instances long-term consequences to contracting COVID-19. And so that may be a good conversation to have as well. There are so many takeaways from today, but I think one of the larger ones, if I may, and that is a lot of the future depends on human behavior, our choices. So ma'ams and sirs, I think we have a responsibility, those of us who've been vaccinated and those of us who are getting vaccinated, hint, hint, those of us who are getting vaccinated, if those who did not get vaccinated already, our responsibility is to share this credible information wide and far so that people can get informed and get vaccinated. I took Pfizer and I actually had 0 side effects. So let's keep moving forward. Let's keep sharing this meaningful information. And again, thank you for everyone who participated, who listened, who asked questions. And thank you all for taking this information and sharing it, because we have a good number of people here, but we can triple that number because of the fact that we're going to leave this session with some more information and armed and tooled to share more credible information. We hear a lot of strange things. Let's share credible information from top officials, healthcare officials like we heard today, and Dr. Bollinger and Dr. Strange. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Get the shot. Get the shot for yourself and for your family, for yourselves, but mainly because you care about others. You care about your family. You care about your neighbors. Get the shot. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Strange. Thank you, Dr. Bollinger. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you. Stay safe, all. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Night.
God bless everybody.